I'm going to introduce Suzu very quickly. She received her doctorate from Michigan State University and graduated from Sichuan University. Is that right? Did I get that
Oh
right?
yeah, that's my home country university.
And she's now an assistant professor at SUNY Oneonta. And I'm going to have you take it away. Thank you for doing this.
Okay, yeah. So thank you everyone for being here. I'm excited to see that like everyone is interested in supporting our English language learners or emerging bilinguals here. My session focuses on assessment. So because we have multiple topics here. In terms of my section, I want to show, oh, hold on, let me see. The agenda, but before that, I want to like show you my email address. This is my contact information. After this session, if you have any questions, feel free to send me email. If you have any questions, let me see. So for today, we have a few agenda. I will talk about the relationship between assessment, English language learners, and language factor, and assessment accommodation for English language learners, using responsive formative assessment for English language learner, and the principles of providing equitable assessment for English language learners. So as we all know that there are quite different terminology for English language learners, like emerging bilinguals, multilinguals, English language learner or ESL learner. So today we just focus on using English language learners so that we can keep tracking the same terminology that used in a different research and also in a different school district. So I want to echo back the previous section regarding the increasing English language learner population in the US public school districts. So according to let's see, the National Education Association, by 2025, 1 out of 4 children in a classroom across the nation will be an English language learner student. So which means many of our school teachers and also pre-service teachers will encounter the situation of working with our English language learners. So it's important to get together and also talk about how to support this group of students populations. And then here, as a map shows, we have English language learners in our New York State. And according to the data from 2020 and 2021, we have almost like 2.6 million students. And 10% of them are English language learners. And those red areas shows that it has most English language learner populations. So based on our common knowledge, we know the English language learners are located at most likely in the urban context, like cities, but we still see increasing English language learners in the suburban and the rural areas. In terms of assessment, we want to brainstorm a little bit here. How do you define or how do you understand assessment? What challenge have you encountered when you work with your English language learners when you assess those students? And what do you think is important to know when assess English language learners? So you can just unmute yourself and share your ideas, or either you can type your response in the chat box. So we can have 1 or 2 minutes to think about those 2 questions before we move to the next step. Yeah, I noticed that Aaron mentioned, yes, vocabulary can be difficult for English language learners. Okay, I noticed that there are a few more response. So Aaron said, understanding what is an expressive issue versus receptive. Aaron, can you please illustrate a little bit about your ideas or kind of like response here?
Yeah, so I don't work with a lot of ELL students, but I would imagine that you would have um, questioning sometimes if a student is not answering a question or an assignment the way that you would hope that they would. Is it that they're really struggling with expressing their knowledge in, or is it a question of whether they're understanding the information and material? Does that make
Yes,
sense?
right. Yeah. Thank you, Aaron. We do have those expressive skills and the receptive skills regarding English language learners' language. And that is a very good point. And we also have Kelly share the point regarding assessment. It's like multiple mod, vocabulary is more like latent based. Yeah, so we see those connection between students' home language and English. Assessment from Susan, am I right? So assessment is seeing what skills students already have in order to inform instruction. Yes, and what students know and what skills they can be used to successful. So great, we notice the vocabulary can be one challenge for English language learners. We see that we use assessment to learn what students have learned and also to inform our instruction. I perceive that it's more like formative assessment. And also, yeah, we do have English language learners, but there are overlapping between English language learner and the students with special education needs. So assessment, according to our research from more social linguistic perspective, assessment is a communication process between students and also the assessment task written in academic language. So which means when students trying to complete what the task asks them to do, they needed to interact with the language of the assessment. So that's why we will focus on talk about the language factor in assessing English language learners. So they definitely have multiple aspects regarding how to assess our English language learners. And thinking of those interaction between assessment and also English language learners, their language or how they interpret the task reading academic language, one question that comes is what's the role of language factor in assessing English language learners? So here from the figure that we can tell language factors actually is kind of like influenced all the different aspects of teaching. It influences assessment, it influences teacher's instruction, and also the classification of our English language learners. So in terms of the relationship between assessment and language factors, we want to gather learning evidence about our English language learners to learn like how well they learn, what's the current status regarding their like math knowledge or science knowledge. So we do want to gather those reliable learning evidence so that we can use those reliable evidence to place our English language learners, which is more about classification. And also we can use those learning evidence that we got from assessment to inform our instruction, as you mentioned in the chat box. So if we cannot gather those reliable learning evidence from our students, which might cause, misplacement of our English language learners, or which might cause some deficit perspective to English language learners. They may say, oh, English language learners tend to have like lower, academic achievement. And at the same time, if we don't have a reliable learning evidence from assessment, we cannot, best provide those best practices, including instruction for our English language learners. So that's why the language factor actually matters. It's related to those equitable and fair assessments for our English language learners, more about educating English language learner equitably. In terms of assessment for English language learners, so far the current research have two major fields. The first field is about English language learners, English language proficiency assessment. For example, the New York State as a second language assessment test. So we use this type of assessment to identify English language learners' English proficiency. And the other type of assessment focus on assessing English language learners' content knowledge. We call it content area assessment. So today for our workshop, we will focus on the content area assessment, which means how to assess English language learners in the science, context, math, or social studies, because we cannot cover everything for our today's workshop. In terms of content area assessment for English language learners, we have two major tasks or agenda. First, as we mentioned, that we want to support our English language learners to best demonstrate what they know. So we need to accommodate English language learners' language needs in the content area assessments, either during those classroom assessment or either in a state assessment. While the other task is to support our English language learner academic success, because we still want to hold high expectation. And then we want to use assessment to gather learning evidence from our English language learners. But at the same time, we want to support their language development along with their content development. So these are the two major tasks, because our English language learners need to develop both language and content at the same time. That could be the one challenge. So we need to accommodate English language learners' learning needs and why we need to accommodate. So here we try to define accommodation. It refers to like adaptations, modifications, or accessibility. You probably have seen those different terminology here interchangeably in different either research papers or other learning materials. So first of all, as we mentioned, the language factor is important. English language learners' language proficiency may interfere with their assessment performance. And second of all, our assessment tools may be culturally and linguistically biased. We say so because that we noticed traditionally or historically, the assessment was developed by our, either teachers or either like test developers, especially for those state assessment in the context of monolingualism. So which means it's more kind of developed in the context of English. While for English language learners, they actually have those very diverse language, culture, home country learning experiences. So some of the assessment that we developed, for example, the task could be culturally and linguistically biased, which might have let our English language learner, feel like not very related. So one example could be some of the English language learners, when they come to the US, we may have those different measure system like feet versus like we use kilometer in China when we measure different like stuff. So that could one thing cause challenge for our English language learners. The other one is the linguistic complexity of the assessment task, because for example, like the math story problem, students need to understand what they are asked to do by reading the passage. So some of the linguistic complexity could cause challenge for students to understand it. The last reason is that accommodating English language learners is still kind of like a new thing. Many accommodation provided to English language learners are developed actually for special education students. So Scholar has called for ELL, English language learner responsive assessment so far. And we do see that there is achievement gap between English language learners and non-English language learners. And one of the reasons could be the complexity or the linguistic complexity of assessment task. So we will talk about what kind of like linguistic complexity could cause challenge. And I think one of them is vocabulary, like you shared in the chat box. So I'm going to see. Yes, Erin shared vocabulary can be difficult for English language learners. So Erin, can you please share a little bit more, like what kind of vocabulary did you notice that English language learners find, difficult or challenging?
Yeah, I'm thinking of, I'm sorry, I have a lot of kids around me right now, but I'm thinking of words that mean something different in math. Like the word mean in math might mean average, but that would be a hard one because they're trying to understand what it means in other contexts as well. So things like, that are specifically for math.
Yes, like vocabulary in the different registers, like math context. I agree. So here we have like 2 example tasks, and we can just look at, either you can look at all the tasks or either you can focus on the first task. And then can you please like try to brainstorm what kind of vocabulary or sentence structure do you feel could be challenging for English language learners when they work on the assessment task here it's a math task? Similarly, you can unmute yourself or you can type your response in the chat box.
So even something maybe like the word feet, they could think of not so much measurement, but like body parts.
Oh, right. I didn't think about that before. Is there anything else?
Yeah, the idea of way up the tower. What is way up?
Oh, good point. I see one message pop up here. Let me see. Oh, the zero of the tower. Yeah, and show the fraction with a pi. And also, yeah, zeros. So we will also come back to visit these 2 tasks later, but we will go ahead and see, according to research, yeah, thank you, Erin. Left is a directional also. There are 3 levels regarding the language factor or linguistic features that could impact ELL's assessment performance when they work on the content area assessment, no matter math or science, social studies, while English language arts is a little bit different. So when I talk about content area assessment, here we focus more on math, science, and or social studies. So according to like the researcher, the sentence level is more about the syntax or the language structure. For example, those multi-carol complex structures with relative clause or subordinate the adverbial clause. We can have one example here. Let's see. So refer back to the task that we have. The Vitis Tower, previously known as the Sears Tower in Chicago, is about this fetal. And as you can see, those areas that I mark in gray is more like those relatives that has been embedded as supplementary information. So actually, the key information is the Willis Tower is about this feet tall, right? But it just has been added more information. This could cause like some challenge for English language learners to understand, especially for those newly arrived who have those enter level or emerging level English language proficiency. Another aspect is more about like passive voice of those verb phrase sometimes also cause challenge for English language learners. In terms of word level, it's more about vocabulary. We call it lexical complexity. Yes, for the vocabulary such as the unfamiliar vocabulary, low frequency vocabulary, those technical terms in different contents, or those synonyms, which means like, vocabulary with similar meanings, or challenging for English language learners according to the research. Like we say, drawing a conclusion in the content, like English language arts context or in the math context, versus when we talk about drawing in the arts or in the daily life is different. And also tables in the math context could be different table in the daily life. So this word has been explicitly mentioned by one of the English language learner students that I worked with in the 5th grade math classroom. So she mentioned that this word could be like confusing for her when she worked on the math task. So we also have some example here, like refer back to the task. The second task, Maggie saved up $20, then she got $7 for her allowance. So the word I highlighted here, this vocabulary could be unfamiliar for some of the English language learners. Like they could be, oh my God, what does allowance mean? So we could teach the vocabulary if we can predict those challenge, right? Or the lexical complexity before we ask the students to finish the task. And item level research shows that there are 2 item level or 2 assessment tasks that seems challenging for English language learners. One is assessment task that focus on comparison item, asking students to select an extreme level, like which item best explain blah, blah. So those kind of questions shows that English language learner struggle a little bit for this type of task. So if you have English language learners, when they finish this type of task, you can just provide more scaffolding, or you can just provide more practices for those type of assessment task. The other type of task is the reference back item. This item usually asks the student to return back to the previous question to find information to solve the question. Usually we see this type of question like in math or science. And students need to understand the previous question and then using that information to solve the other type of problem. But definitely, I think this type of question is challenging for every students, especially for English language learners. If they couldn't understand what they are asked to do in the previous question, it's kind of like a nightmare for them to finish the next one. So here, let's have more examples trying to predict the potential challenge for our English language learners when they work on their math or science tasks. So here is where it's more like science task here. So similarly, what kind of vocabulary or sentence structure do you think that could be cause challenge or a barrier for our English language learner to understand what they are asked to do? Yes, understand the word and concept of mass according to Suzanne. Like thinner, longer, lighter. Yeah, I agree. Visuals. Yeah, I like visuals, and I think many students like visuals to show those holding or squeezing. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's a simple step or move, just very helpful for our English language learners. Okay, so usually we have 3 steps to predict what kind of challenge for our English language learners when they work on the content area assessment, either like, in classroom or the kind of like state assessment. So definitely it's very important, first of all, to learn about English language learners, like their English language proficiency level, their content knowledge level, or their home schooling experiences in a home country. So definitely, as you can see that, as what I mentioned, there is another research field focused on English language learners, English language proficiency. So we can use the students' test score as resources to inform us their language level. For example, they could be entering, emerging, transitioning, expanding, or commanding. So in New York State, students who hold the English proficiency level from entering to expanding need to take the English language proficiency test. Every year they have to take the test to show their English language proficiency levels. While if they are in the commanding stage, you don't have to, but otherwise they need to take those English language proficiency tests after they are identified as English language learner. We can also see those different score for English language skills like listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So we can use those test scores as resource to inform us. But back to our assessment task here, we can see that the vocabulary such as thinner, yes, as I mentioned, the squeeze, the mass, and also the balloon could be challenging for our English language learner, especially those newly arrived. The next step is we identify the language and linguistic amount, as we just mentioned here, and we just scaffold our English language learners' comprehension. So I think you have provided very good strategy in terms of how to scaffold visuals. It's very important. So we can show students, or we can use like pictures to help our students to understand what does squeeze mean, what does a balloon mean. We can also teach the key vocabulary. If we predict those vocabulary could be challenging before the assessment. So we can also using translation or bilingual, word bank to help our students to understand those technical terms in different content. And overall, researchers has proposed in English language learner responsive assessment accommodations. We will call it ELL responsive assessment accommodation taxonomy. So for this taxonomy, it kind of like emphasize 2 types of accommodation. One is a direct linguistic support. So those ones more like the purpose is to meet English language learners' language or linguistic needs. So we could use a bilingual resource like bilingual test translation, linguistic modification or simplification, those English or bilingual glossary, dictionary, read aloud word bank. So those has been quite often used in the state assessment, including some of the classroom written assessment across the nation. we also have indirect linguistic support. Those can be used actually for every student, like actual wait time or testing time, quiet assessment environment, or we can provide adult assistance. So one thing I want to point out here is that as we have emphasized the importance of perceiving our English language learners' home language and culture from an asset perspective. So supporting those kind of like bilingualism is very important. Translanguaging has been emphasized in assessing English language learners as well. Previous section or previous workshop that has been presented by Dr. Abbas Suradi. So this one is kind of like a continue, but I won't expand for the translanguaging part. But research recommend using translanguaging in the initial content assessment to allow teachers and schools to determine what incoming students know. For example, one case is that teachers can provide those so-called bilingual assessment. For the same assessment task, teachers can allow students to use all the language repertoire to respond the assessment task. So for example, one teacher used to compare that the students' response, where students respond in Spanish versus students respond in English. So by compare the students' response in different language, the teacher can better visualize the students' content and knowledge. Instead of only use one assessment, assessment, usually we probably only see students' response in English, but we might lose some insight regarding our English language learners' content and knowledge level. Okay, so we have talked about a little bit the assessment accommodation strategy, and I would love to know that what other strategy have you used or would you recommend used for accommodating English language learners in content area assessment? Because I feel like every teachers have a lot of experiences working with English language learner, and you will contribute a very valuable insight. So can have 1 or 2 minutes to think about or to talk about or share the strategy that you use. Yes, thank you, Marisa. Extra time, clarification of questions, checking over their work. Yes, say words aloud. Yeah, Google Translation can be a way for supporting English language learners, especially that when they just, arrive in the US and have like those enter level, or when you do not share or do not speak the same home language. Learning board. Yeah, thank you, Kelly. So you have provide like multiple mode of support for the student, like visuals, vocabulary, the main points for the contents or the units. Yeah, I like everyone shares in a chat box. So we can go ahead and continue to share. We learn from each other, actually. That's that's the meaning that why we need a workshop and gather everyone here. Basically, when we select the accommodation, because we work with our students, so we know much better about our English language learners. So we will need to consider like a few key principles when we select accommodation for English language learner. The first one is definitely meet English language learners' individual needs, because they are really, really kind of like diverse in terms of their experiences or home language, English language proficiency. So that could be one part that we really need patience and spend efforts when we work with our English language learners. The other part is collaboration. So because we cannot be the teacher who know everything, collaboration could be more effective. Usually for the ESL teacher or ESO teacher, our kind of general education teacher or special education teacher can work together to talk about how can best support our English language learners. We can also use current resources from the research, using research to inform our instruction. One type of the accommodation that has been developed is called STELLA. It's Selection Taxonomy for English Learners Accommodation. It's a computerized decision-making system designed to provide systematic mechanism. Because according to the research, when teachers provide accommodation to our English language learners, there is one kind of like the teachers also tend to provide a general accommodation that can be used with everyone. Definitely it's good, but for English language learner, we also want to see those accommodations that specifically to meet English language learner language needs. And those systems can be some resources we use to help us make decision. Definitely, it doesn't mean that we have to follow those recommendations by just like a resources to help us or to offer us some ideas regarding how to provide. I didn't use this Stella, this system before, but it comes from the research. If any teachers have used it before or encountered before, you can share more experiences. So the next part is more about like supporting English language learners, not just like best demonstrate what they know, but at the same time support their academic success and hold high expectation. And formative assessment has been like, emphasized as a powerful tool to support English language learner. Definitely for all students, it also benefits for English language learners. We propose formative assessments because as teachers, we have used formative assessment every day. And those type of assessment actually, go along with your instruction and also classroom teaching. And the students spend a lot of time actually in the classroom. So formative assessment, I think definitely you already know very well. There are 3 stages. Formative assessment is more like a systematic process. It's not separate like stage, but instead it's more like complete step, and each step in from each other. So first of all, we need to communicate with our students where they need to go. It's more about learning objectives. And research shows that teachers has done a very good job regarding gathering evidence about students learning, which is about step 2, where am I now? However, in terms of step 1, communicating learning objective, still like teachers sometimes do not spend a lot of time doing that. Maybe it's because of the instruction time limit or maybe other reasons. And then we also have the stage 3, which is more about how teacher act on the learning evidence of students. Either you reteach or you develop some plan to support our students. And talking about formative assessment here, we want to focus on formative assessment for English language learners, because it shows that formative assessment can best support our English language learners, both content and also language development. So we call it a responsive formative assessment for English language learners. Here I have a few bullet points to show that specifically what we need to attend to when we use formative assessment for English language learners. First of all, we need to set up both content and also language objective, because usually I see a lot of teachers set up content objective because they are more like math content teacher in elementary classroom or high school, middle school, but there is kind of a lack of setting up language objective explicitly. However, this is very important to remind our teacher to support English language learners' language development, but at the same time to allow English language learner be aware that they need to develop this type of language skills. And then in terms of second step, gather students' learning evidence. French language learner, it has shown that discursive formative assessment is a way that can best support English language learners. It's more like teacher perform or conduct a discussion with the students, or having students talk with the peers, because students can interact with teachers and their peers during the classroom, and they can just get a feedback from teachers or peers so that they can move their learning forward. While the third step is action on English language learners' learning evidence. For example, after we have noticed our English language learner had some difficulty regarding specific vocabulary, we can reteach those vocabulary for our English language learners, such as using the FAIR model. For the content objective, language objective, here I just show one example, can quickly go over it. One thing I want to highlight that for language objective, it's very important to explicit point out what language domain or what language skills that our English language learner will be able to develop in your class. So for example, students will be able to orally describe the characteristics of liquids, solids, and gases to a partner. Okay, so I can share my slides actually later if you need. You can ask Aaron how to access to the slides. So this is more about formative assessment, stage 1, but highlighting setting up both explicit content and language objective to support English language learners. And how to write language objectives? Well, we don't like formula, but there is kind of like a formula here. Usually when you write the language objective, you need to show the language domain and also the language skills that English language learner need to develop. So if you think about the VITA or ELP standards, you can, that's just resources, right, to guide us to know what kind of English language proficiency skills that students need to develop. But here is a formula. You can just write like I can plus what kind of domain. We have teaching like the 4 skills like reading, writing, listening, speaking, and also specific language skills, like what kind of word or phrase, and then in what way provide the scaffolds for students. So here there's one example. I can verbally or orally present a short speech and differentiate between those signs vocabulary here. Using comparative sentence structure, I can show the structure to the students. So this is very clear for English language learners in terms of like what skills they need to develop. And also for teachers, if you set up those clear learning objectives for language, you can check, during the ongoing assessment to see how well students develop this type of language skills. We have a short video to show that from Cindy why language objective is important. We can just, it's very short, like 2 minutes. We can like
one of the most powerful ways to change teacher instruction is to look at content and language objectives. Now with the standards, we're in a standards-based movement. We have great state and national standards. So these are available to teachers. They don't have to reinvent the wheel, but they often have to break them down into what is going to be accomplished during a unit, during a week, during a day. And then the next step is to look at the language that's expected of that, because everything that we teach kids and expect them to do is through the medium of language. It's listening, it's responding, it's reading, it's writing. So what do we need to do to make sure that the reading, writing, listening, speaking is an open pathway to the content? And writing language objectives and content objectives is one way to keep on track.
Okay, so this is the first step for formative assessment. Objective, right? Communicate with students, both content and language objective. Well,
one of the most powerful.
So there is one example to show how the teacher, both the ESL teacher and content teacher work together to break down the language components that English language learner need to develop. You can check my slides later if you're interested in. Because of the time limit, I want to let you go over the examples and see. So in terms of the other way, we also highlight explicit vocabulary instruction for our English language learners, because many teachers assume that students has been exposed to those classroom environments that they talk with their peers, they talk with the teachers. It's more like a rich discourse environment. So our teachers sometimes will assume our English language learner will take in those vocabulary or language skills automatically. However, according to the second language development or acquisition principles, students do need explicit vocabulary instruction or language structure teaching or instruction. One way that we use or one strategy we use to support explicit vocabulary instruction is we call FRIA model. So have you heard this model or have you used this model before in your classroom? Yeah. So because for English language learner, because I learn English as a second language, when we learn the English, sometimes we only know one dimension of the vocabulary. However, when we use those vocabulary, like the table, what else, like drawing, and also I think one teacher shared like wonderful example. I kind of couldn't think of remember, but reminded me of that later. But we just needed to provide those different dimension or different meaning of this vocabulary in different contexts. And also we show examples to our students so that students can better understand the vocabulary. So we will say this more about vocabulary depths, not just vocabulary wise, but also vocabulary depths, like how well the students know the vocabulary. Okay, so it's come to our conclusion section. Drawing on the information that we just talked about, we want to highlight the principles for equitable assessment for our English language learners. So there has been a few principles here. So first of all, we need to matching the learning goals and language of instruction. Meet the English language learners both content goals and also language goals. And second, make sure that assessment task is comprehensible, both linguistically and culturally. We have talked about different strategy to accommodate our English language learners. And then one thing we want to point out is we still need to hold high expectation for our students, challenging students to think about the difficult ideas, and also using different strategy like formative assessment, visuals or other scaffolding ways to elicit students' understanding. We can also scaffold the use of language and support students' learning, like the FIA model that we just talked about to support English language learners' vocabulary. Overall, as we can see that for the principles, we recommend our teachers assess those rich, well-constructed, meaningful knowledge and assess what students do know instead of, oh, we just want to see what our students do not know. So we still want to assess what our students do know. We hold high expectation and for our students. There are some of the strategy we already talked about. We can simplify the vocabulary of grammar for content task. We can keep the content, but still simplify those, the language of the task to make sure our English language learner can understand it. We can use different scaffolding, extra time, dictionary, word bank, or we can also use interpreter. While this could be, not every school has this type of resources, we can read questions aloud. Okay, so there's one example showing how we can modify the language of the task to make sure that our students can better understand. You can read this, quickly go over those two tasks to see how they may be different. So because of the time limit, I won't let everyone share what you noticed. But first of all, the second one, as you can see, is more visually friendly because the one use bullet point to show what students need to respond using two different questions here. And also the second one, as you can see that they provide more kind of details regarding what students are supposed to respond compared with the first assessment task. So this is one of the example how we can modify the assessment task to make sure that it's more easier for our English language learners to understand, but at the same time to still keep the core, the content that we want to assess our students. And also we can scaffold English language learners by using the sentence starters, because sometimes English language learner do not know where to start. We can using those sentence starter to help them to frame their response, either orally or either in a written format. And also graphic organizer is one way that many teachers like concept map or those different charts or diagrams. And that's all. So I think it's perfect timing. We still have 1 more minute. Let's see whether you have questions or whether you have any comments that you want to share your strategy or your experiences for supporting English language learners.
But
hi, Erin. It's actually working now.
Oh, it is.
Go on my time. Thank you, though.
No problem. Oh, Kelly says she needs the link as well. I wonder why the link is not working. Oh, she got it too. Okay. That's interesting. I wonder why it wasn't working. The internet. So Sue, do you know what's going on with the program this afternoon?
Yeah, we are going to rush. So Dr. Young and myself need to go. So we're waiting for you to say that, can we leave right now? Because we need to walk to Mori Center. Yeah, so there will be a session for our external partners to be with students, and we have to be there. In fact, it has already started, so we are here. It starts from 4:30 till tonight 8 o'clock.
Okay, so I
If
better
there's
let you guys
nothing, then
go.
thank you very much and bye.
Thank you. And
Thank you, everyone. Have a
know what
good.
goes on with that. I should have been there, but I couldn't do it because of this actually.
Okay, we'll keep you posted. Bye.
All right, thank you.
Okay, bye, everyone.
Bye bye. And we're gonna end it for everyone.